Welcome to Crime Chronicles Confidential. In the dead of night, where shadows move unseen, in a world where loyalty is a lie, and where every whispered secret can cost a life, this is Crime Chronicles Confidential. We don't just tell stories. We expose the darkness. We take you deep into the minds of those who deceive, betray, and kill. Every crime has a story. Every betrayal has a cost. What makes a man cross the line? How far will greed take him before everything crumbles? And in the end, who really survives? Tonight, we bring you a tale of deception, greed, and the deadliest kind of betrayal. A deal meant to change a life. A night that turned into a nightmare. And a man who walked into a game he didn't understand. This is Frozen Betrayal. Hold your breath. Because once this story begins, there's no turning back. The city lay frozen under a thick blanket of snow. The streets, once alive with the hum of restless souls, were now deserted, swallowed by an eerie silence. A lone car crept through the empty roads, its headlights flickering against the swirling mist. Inside, Ethan Walker sat motionless, gripping the wheel with steady hands, though his mind raced with uncertainty. He exhaled, watching his breath fog up the windshield. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained unreadable. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A deal, a transaction, money and job done, and then freedom. But nothing in this city was ever simple. As he turned down a dimly lit alley, a strange unease settled over him, an instinct he couldn't ignore. Something about tonight felt wrong. He tapped his fingers on the dashboard, his pulse quickening. What if this wasn't just another job? What if this time he was walking into something he couldn't escape? Ethan pulled into the back alley of an old, dimly lit bar. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, buzzing softly in the silence of the frozen night. He killed the engine and sat still for a moment, staring at the black briefcase on the passenger seat. $1 million. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over. He inhaled deeply, adjusting his coat before stepping out. His boots crunched against the icy pavement as he made his way inside. The bar smelled of old whiskey and cigarette smoke. The low hum of conversation filled the air, but Ethan wasn't here for drinks or small talk. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on a man seated in a private booth in the back. Vince Delgado, dressed in a sharp black coat, a glass of whiskey in one hand. Vince barely acknowledged Ethan's arrival. The man was a king in this city's underworld, and he knew it. Ethan approached the table and sat down across from him. The briefcase felt heavier than it should as he placed it between them. Vince took a slow sip of his drink, his piercing gaze never leaving Ethan. Then he smirked. "You sure about this, Walker?" Vince's voice was low, calculated. Ethan didn't blink. "You got the cash?" Vince chuckled, setting his glass down. With a snap of his fingers, one of his men appeared, carrying an identical black briefcase. He placed it on the table and stepped back. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching forward, unlatching the case. The sight of tightly packed stacks of bills should have eased his nerves, but instead, they only tightened the knot in his stomach. Everything looked right. The numbers checked out. But something about Vince's smirk, the way his fingers tapped against the glass, something wasn't right. Ethan's fingers hovered over the case. His instinct screamed at him. Was this really just a simple exchange? Or had he just walked into a trap? Ethan shut the briefcase and leaned back, masking his unease with a forced calm. Vince studied him, his smirk unwavering, as if he could sense the doubt creeping into Ethan's mind. A sharp vibration against his thigh made him flinch. His phone. He slipped a hand into his coat pocket and pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. A single message. "Get out. Now." It's a setup. His stomach twisted. He lifted his eyes, scanning the room without moving his head. The bar was the same, dim, filled with smoke and quiet conversations. But suddenly, every shadow seemed deeper, every movement more suspicious. Vince took another slow sip of his drink, tapping his fingers against the table. "You seem distracted, Walker," Vince said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. "Something on your mind?" Ethan forced a chuckle, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Just making sure we're good here," he said, keeping his tone steady. Vince tilted his head slightly, amused. "We're always good," he replied. "As long as no one gets any bright ideas." Ethan nodded, but his heartbeat was hammering in his ears. Was the message real? A warning from someone on the inside? Or just a trick? He had only seconds to decide. Stay and risk walking into a trap, or leave and make an enemy out of the most dangerous man in the city. Vince set his glass down with deliberate slowness, his fingers drumming lightly against the wooden table. His smirk faded, replaced by something colder, something dangerous. "You know, Ethan," Vince said, his voice unnervingly calm, "I've been in this business a long time. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a man's eyes tell you everything." Ethan held his gaze, keeping his face unreadable. But Vince leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And right now, your eyes are telling me you don't trust me." The air grew heavier. The dim light above flickered. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. Behind Vince, one of his men shifted slightly, hand resting near his coat, too close to where a gun would be. Vince exhaled through his nose, shaking his head as if disappointed. He snapped his fingers, and the door behind him creaked open. Two men dragged someone inside. His face was swollen, blood dripping from his temple. His knees barely held him up as they threw him to the ground in front of the table. Ethan's stomach tightened. He recognized him. One of Vince's low-level enforcers, a guy who had probably thought he was untouchable. Vince didn't look at the man groaning on the floor. He kept his eyes locked on Ethan. "You know what I hate more than anything?" Vince mused, his tone almost casual. "A rat." The man on the floor whimpered. "Vince, please." A gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The man's body jerked, then went still, blood pooling beneath him. Ethan didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. Vince sighed, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a bad mood. He looked at Ethan again, expression unreadable. "You were saying?" he asked. Ethan forced a small smile, his mind racing. "Nothing," he said. "We're good." Vince held his gaze a moment longer, then chuckled. "That's what I thought." But Ethan knew this wasn't just a display of power. This was a message. Vince was watching him, waiting for him to slip. Ethan stepped out of the bar, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. His breath fogged as he exhaled, his mind still reeling from what had just happened inside. Vince was testing him, pushing him, waiting for a crack. And the worst part, Ethan wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the act. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a cigarette. As he flicked the lighter, a voice cut through the silence. "Bad night, Walker?" Ethan's fingers froze on the lighter. He turned his head slightly, already knowing the voice. Olivia Kane. She stood near the alleyway, leaning against the wall, her face half hidden in the shadows. Smoke curled from the cigarette between her fingers, the red ember glowing softly in the dark. Ethan sighed, lighting his own cigarette before turning toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She smirked, exhaling smoke. "Neither should you." Ethan took a slow drag, studying her. Olivia wasn't just another one of Vince's people. She was his confidant, his fixer. If she was here, it wasn't by accident. "What do you want?" he asked. Olivia took a step forward, her boots crunching against the ice. "I want to see how long you plan on staying alive." Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She flicked her cigarette to the ground, crushing it under her heel. Then, she leaned in just enough that her voice dropped to a whisper. "Vince doesn't trust you," she said. "And after tonight, I don't blame him." Ethan's chest tightened. "I didn't do anything." "Doesn't matter," Olivia said. "He's watching you, waiting for a reason. And when he finds it..." She trailed off, tapping her fingers against his chest. "Well, you saw what happened back there." Ethan stayed silent. "You need to be smart," Olivia continued, "which means knowing when to get out." He exhaled through his nose. "And what? You're just offering me a way out of the goodness of your heart." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see Vince lose." Ethan studied her carefully. She was playing her own game. That much was obvious. But whether she was his ally or just another threat, he wasn't sure yet. "Think about it," Olivia said, stepping back into the shadows. "Before you end up like the guy on the floor." And then, just like that, she was gone. Ethan stood still, cigarette burning between his fingers. The warning in her voice lingered in his head. If she was right, he was already running out of time. Ethan sat behind the wheel of his car, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. The weight of Olivia's warning pressed against his chest. Vince was watching him, testing him, waiting for him to slip. He exhaled, his breath fogging up the cold glass of the windshield. His instinct screamed at him, "Get out while you can," but it was too late for that. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another message. Unknown number. "You didn't listen. Now it's too late." A shadow moved in the rearview mirror. Before he could react, something cold and metallic pressed against the side of his neck. "Drive," a voice ordered. Ethan swallowed hard. His mind raced, but he kept his hand steady as he turned the key, the engine humming to life. "Where are we going?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Just drive," the voice repeated. No questions. Ethan pulled out onto the street, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Vince sent you?" he asked. The gun dug deeper into his skin. "I said no questions." Ethan clenched his jaw, focusing on the road ahead. The streetlights flickered past, casting long shadows over the empty roads. His mind worked quickly. If Vince wanted him dead, he wouldn't have sent someone to make it look like a casual ride. This wasn't an execution. This was something else. A test. Or a warning. "You sure you want to do this?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone even. The man behind him didn't respond. Ethan took a slow breath. The intersection was coming up. If he was going to make a move, it had to be now. At the last second, he yanked the steering wheel, sending the car skidding across the ice. The man in the back cursed, momentarily thrown off balance. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed the brakes, throwing his weight backward, crashing into the attacker. The gun fired, but the shot went wide, shattering the passenger window. Ethan twisted, elbowing the man in the face. The gun clattered to the floor. They struggled, the car rocking violently on the icy road. Ethan grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting hard until he heard a sickening crack. The man screamed, and Ethan didn't waste the opportunity. He grabbed the gun and pointed it straight at his head. "Who sent you?" Ethan growled. The man panted, blood dripping from his nose. But he didn't answer. Ethan cocked the gun. "Last chance." The man's lips curled into a weak, bloody smile. "You already know," he whispered. Ethan's stomach turned, because he did know. This wasn't just a warning. This was Vince's way of making one thing clear. No one betrays him and lives. Ethan sat in his car, hands still gripping the gun, his breath heavy and uneven. The man in the back seat groaned in pain, his broken wrist hanging limp at his side. Blood dripped from his nose onto his jacket, but he still managed a twisted smirk. "You think this changes anything?" the man rasped. "You think Vince doesn't already know?" Ethan's fingers tightened around the gun. He should pull the trigger. End it now. But something stopped him. His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Company's coming." A sudden knock on the driver's side window made him jolt. Ethan snapped his head to the side. A figure stood outside, barely visible under the dim glow of the streetlight. Dark coat, gloved hands, face obscured by the falling snow. The man in the back seat chuckled weakly. "That'll be for me," he murmured. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't expecting anyone. Vince wouldn't have sent backup. This was something else. Slowly, he lowered the gun but kept it close. His other hand moved toward the door handle. Another knock. Harder this time. Ethan swallowed and rolled down the window just enough to see the stranger's face. It wasn't Vince's man. It was Olivia. Her eyes flicked to the man slumped in the back seat, then back to Ethan. "Well," she said, her breath visible in the freezing air, "looks like I got here just in time." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "For what?" Olivia smirked. "To keep you from making a mistake you can't take back." Ethan exhaled sharply. He was starting to hate surprises. Ethan stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the ice. The cold wind cut through his coat as he turned to Olivia, his breath forming in thick clouds. "You want to explain what the hell is going on?" he asked. Olivia glanced at the man in the back seat, still slumped against the door, his breathing ragged. "Not here," she said. "We need to move." Ethan hesitated. The streets were quiet, but the silence felt unnatural. Too empty. Too still. Something was wrong. He looked up. A street lamp flickered above them, casting long shadows against the falling snow. "Where's Vince?" he asked, his voice low. Olivia's expression didn't change. "Looking for you." Ethan clenched his jaw. He already knew that. The real question was, how much time did he have before Vince found him first? The man in the back seat groaned. Ethan turned, gripping the gun tighter. "Who sent you?" The man chuckled weakly, spitting blood onto the seat. "You're already dead, Walker," he muttered. "You just don't know it yet." Ethan's fingers twitched on the trigger. Olivia touched his arm. "Not here," she said again. "We need to go. Now." Ethan exhaled, scanning the empty street one last time. Then, from the distance, tires screeching, headlights cutting through the mist. A black SUV, and it was coming fast. Ethan's stomach dropped. They had been found. Ethan grabbed Olivia's wrist and yanked her toward the alley. Their boots slipped on the ice as they ran, the roar of the approaching SUV growing louder behind them. He didn't need to look back. He knew what was coming. Gunmen, Vince's men, and if they got caught now, there wouldn't be a second chance. They turned a sharp corner, ducking into the shadows between two abandoned buildings. The air was thick with frost, their breaths coming in ragged clouds. Ethan pressed his back against the cold brick wall, gun raised, listening. The SUV skidded to a stop. Doors slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched against the ice. Men's voices, low, sharp. "They were here," one of them said. A pause. Then another voice. "Find them." Ethan's grip tightened around the gun. Olivia leaned in, her lips barely moving. "Where do we go?" she whispered. Ethan's eyes darted to the fire escape above them, their only way out. But before he could move, a shadow shifted at the far end of the alley. Not one of Vince's men. Someone else. Standing still. Watching. Ethan's breath caught. Who the hell? The figure didn't move. Didn't speak. Just waited. Like they had been expecting him. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The figure at the end of the alley remained still, cloaked in darkness, while Vince's men combed the streets behind him. No time to think. No time to run. "Stay here," he murmured to Olivia. She grabbed his wrist. "Ethan, just stay low." Ethan stepped forward cautiously, gun lowered but ready. The figure finally moved. A slow step forward, then another. The faint glow of a cigarette ember flickered in the darkness. A voice followed, smooth, calculated. "I was wondering how long it would take you to come looking for me." Ethan's grip tightened. "I wasn't looking for anyone." The man chuckled, taking another drag of his cigarette. "But I found you anyway, didn't I?" Ethan didn't reply. His instinct screamed danger, but something about the stranger's tone was different. He wasn't with Vince's men. He wasn't panicking. He was awaiting. The man exhaled, letting the smoke curl around his face. "You're in trouble, Walker," he said. "And right now you've got two options. Stay and die, or take the deal I'm offering. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What deal? The man took another step forward, his face partially visible under the dim streetlight. One that keeps you breathing long enough to get out of this mess. Ethan hesitated. Deals with men like this always came at a price. But then, behind him, he heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Vince's men were closing in. No time, no choice. Ethan turned back to the stranger. What do you want in return? The man smiled, flicking his cigarette away. Just your soul? Ethan didn't have the luxury of second thoughts. The man's offer was clear, survival at a cost. And right now, survival was all that mattered. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Vince's men were almost on them. Ethan exhaled sharply. Fine, get us out of here. The stranger smirked, reaching into his coat. For a brief second, Ethan tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, the man pulled out a key and tossed it to him. Black sedan, 3 blocks down, engines running. Ethan caught the key, eyes narrowing. And how do I know this isn't a setup? The man exhaled through his nose, amused. You don't. But I do know that if you don't start running now, you won't be asking questions much longer. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He turned to Olivia. Move! They sprinted down the alley, the cold biting at their skin. Behind them, a voice shouted, There! They're running! Followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off brick walls as Ethan and Olivia weaved through the maze of darkened streets. The snow beneath them was slick with ice, making every step treacherous. The sedan was exactly where the man said it would be, engine humming, waiting. Ethan yanked the door open and shoved Olivia inside before diving in himself. He slammed the door shut, jamming the key into the ignition. Tires screeched against the frozen road as the car lurched forward. In the rear-view mirror, Vince's men were already jumping into their own vehicles. The chase had begun. Ethan gritted his teeth, hands tight around the wheel. This better be worth it, he muttered, because if the stranger had lied, they were driving straight into a death trap. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the black sedan tore through the icy streets, the tires barely holding traction on the frozen asphalt. Headlights from Vince's men glared in the rearview mirror, getting closer. Olivia checked the gun in her lap, snapping the magazine into place. They won't stop, Ethan. You know that. I know, he muttered. A sharp turn. The car skidded, barely missing a street lamp before straightening out. Then darkness. The street lights ahead flickered and died. The entire block was swallowed in shadows. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something's wrong, Olivia murmured. Ethan's hands twitched on the wheel. He could feel it too, an eerie stillness, like they had just crossed into something unseen. Then, without warning, a figure stepped into the road. Ethan's breath caught. A man, standing dead center in the street, perfectly still, dressed in black. No hesitation. No fear, just waiting. Ethan slammed the brakes. The car skidded, coming to a violent stop inches from the man. Silence. Olivia's fingers tightened around the gun. Who the hell? The man didn't move. The street remained eerily quiet. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his coat. Ethan's pulse spiked. His fingers hovered over the gear shift, ready to floor it. A glint of metal. A gun. The stranger raised it, aiming directly at Ethan. Olivia reacted first. She fired. The windshield cracked as bullets ripped through the glass. But the man was already gone. Just vanished. Ethan's heart hammered. Where did he? A shadow moved. Not ahead. Behind them, Ethan's breath hitched. The killer wasn't on the street anymore. He was inside the car. Ethan's muscles tensed as the realization hit him. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just another one of Vince's thugs. A whisper of movement. Cold steel pressed against the back of Ethan's neck. Drive, the voice commanded. Olivia's breathing was sharp and controlled, her fingers tightening around the gun. But Ethan caught the slightest shake in her grip. The man in the back seat had appeared out of nowhere. No doors had opened. No sound had given him away. This wasn't just a hitman. This was something worse. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. A pair of calm, knowing eyes stared back at him. "You've got 5 seconds," the man said. Ethan's mind raced. He weighed his options. Then, slowly, he shifted the car into gear. The tires crunched over ice as the vehicle rolled forward. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his voice even. The man smirked. "You'll see." They drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. Then, the man spoke again. "You're in a bad spot, Walker, and it's about to get worse." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Who sent you?" A chuckle. "You already know." Ethan's jaw clenched. Ray Holden. The detective had always played both sides. Crooked cops were nothing new in this city. But Holden wasn't just another corrupt officer. He was a bridge between the law and the underworld. The man who decided who stayed in business and who disappeared. And right now, he had decided that Ethan Walker was a loose end. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "So, what's the play?" Ethan asked. "You kill me now, or let Vince have the honors." The man behind him smirked. "That depends." "On what?" A moment of silence. Then, "On how much your life is worth to you." Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't a hit. This was a deal. And deals with men like Holden always came with a price. Ethan clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the wheel. He knew how this worked. Holden never got his hands dirty unless there was something in it for him. "Let me guess," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "Vince wants me dead. But you? You see an opportunity." The man in the back seat chuckled, his gun still pressed against Ethan's neck. "You catch on quick," he said. "Vince is convinced you're a rat. And when Vince decides something, well, you know how that ends." Ethan kept his focus on the road, his mind working fast. "If he thinks I'm a rat," Ethan said carefully, "then why am I still breathing?" The man leaned forward slightly, his breath warm against Ethan's ear. "Because I told him I'd handle you myself," he said. "And because I think you might be useful." Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. "You want me to work for you," Ethan guessed. The man smiled. "Work? No. I want you to lie." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Vince trusts me about as much as he trusts a loaded gun pointed at his head," Ethan said. "What makes you think he'd believe anything I say?" Holden's man laughed softly. "Because you won't just be lying to him. You'll be lying to everyone." Ethan's fingers twitched. He didn't like where this was going. "You want me to frame someone," Ethan said. The man leaned back against the seat. "Call it what you want. But if you want to stay alive, you're going to give Vince a new name. Someone to take the fall. Someone to blame." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what Holden was doing. Spinning a web of lies, pushing pieces around a board where only he knew the end game. And if Ethan agreed, he'd be just another pawn in Holden's game. But if he refused, he wouldn't live long enough to regret it. Ethan's jaw tightened. The weight of Holden's deal pressed against his chest like a loaded gun. He knew the rules of this game, lie or die. But before he could answer, the car jerked violently. Tires screeched against the icy road as something slammed into them from behind. A second SUV. Vince's men had found them. "Drive!" The man in the back seat barked, but Ethan was already reacting, gripping the wheel as he fought to regain control. Another hit. The car fishtailed on the ice, headlights flashing wildly across the darkened streets. Then a gunshot. Glass shattered as a bullet ripped through the back window. Olivia ducked, cursing under her breath. She raised her gun and fired back, but the SUV stayed close, its engine roaring like a predator chasing wounded prey. "Get us out of here, Walker," the man behind him shouted. Ethan's eyes darted to the side streets, searching for an escape. Then he saw it. An open alleyway, slick with fresh snow, leading toward the frozen river. He made his choice. Yanking the wheel hard, Ethan sent the car skidding sideways into the alley. The SUV behind them followed, tires struggling for grip on the icy road. Gunfire erupted from both sides, bullets sparking off brick walls, the air thick with smoke and cold. Then another shot, and this time someone screamed. Ethan's stomach twisted as he saw Olivia slump forward, blood staining the front of her coat. "Damn it," Ethan growled, reaching for her, but she waved him off, her jaw clenched in pain. "Keep going," she hissed. More bullets. The SUV rammed into them again, forcing Ethan's car dangerously close to the edge of the riverbank. He had seconds to decide. One wrong move, and they'd all end up sinking beneath the ice. Ethan's grip tightened. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. And then he made his move. He yanked the emergency brake. The car spun violently. The SUV behind them had no time to react. It hit a patch of ice, lost control, and went careening off the edge. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Ethan watched as the vehicle flipped, crashing through the frozen river. Ice shattered like glass. The SUV disappeared beneath the dark, freezing water. Silence. Heavy breathing filled the car. Olivia groaned, clutching her wound. Ethan forced himself to breathe, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The snow was stained red, and for the first time that night, he knew there was no turning back. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled the car back onto the road, the weight of everything crashing down on him. Blood soaked through Olivia's coat, her breath coming in sharp, pained gasps. "We need a doctor," she muttered, pressing her hand against the wound. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The wreckage of the SUV was barely visible in the distance, swallowed by the frozen river. But Vince's men weren't done yet. His phone buzzed. Another message. Unknown number. "You should have run when you had the chance." Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. Then, headlights flared behind him. Another vehicle. Not Vince's. Something else. The black sedan glided through the snow like a ghost, silent, unhurried. Its presence was different, sending a chill through Ethan that had nothing to do with the cold. "What the hell is that?" Olivia whispered, her voice weak. Ethan didn't answer. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't normal. The car pulled up alongside them, through the tinted glass. Ethan could barely make out the driver's face, expressionless, eyes locked straight ahead. Then, the passenger window rolled down, and Ethan finally saw him, a man in a dark suit wearing black gloves, sitting perfectly still. In his hand, a small, silver envelope. He raised it slightly, as if offering a gift. Ethan's breath hitched. The man didn't speak, didn't signal, just waited. The meaning was clear. This wasn't just another enemy. This was a message, a final warning, and whatever was inside that envelope was a death sentence. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The black sedan stayed perfectly aligned with his car, moving effortlessly over the icy road. The man inside remained still, holding the silver envelope like a silent executioner. "Don't stop," Olivia muttered, clutching her wound. Ethan didn't need to be told. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine growling as the car shot forward. The black sedan followed, effortless, unrushed, like it already knew how this would end. Ethan swerved onto a side street, tires screeching against the ice. The car fishtailed but straightened, narrowly missing a lamppost. He glanced in the mirror. The black sedan never wavered. It turned the corner smoothly, closing the distance. Ethan gritted his teeth. This wasn't just a chase. It was a hunt. His phone buzzed again. You can't outrun fate. A chill ran through him. He gripped the wheel tighter, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "That car," Olivia whispered, her voice weak. "It's not Vince's." Ethan nodded. "I know." He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they wanted. Him. The city streets blurred past as Ethan weaved through intersections, running red lights, barely dodging oncoming traffic. The sedan followed, never hesitating, never falling behind. Who the hell were they? A sharp turn ahead. An old industrial yard covered in thick snow. It was a dead end, but Ethan had no choice. He yanked the wheel hard. The car skidded into the yard, past rusted shipping containers and abandoned warehouses. He slammed the brakes, the tires locking on the ice. The car came to a halt. Silence. Ethan's breath came in sharp gasps. His heart pounded. Then headlights. The black sedan rolled into the yard, slow and deliberate. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had no exits, no time. The driver's door of the sedan opened. A figure stepped out, and Ethan knew this wasn't just an enemy. This was the end of the road. Ethan's breath turned shallow. The black sedan sat motionless, its headlights cutting through the thick snowfall like knives. The driver's door remained open, but no one stepped out. A heavy silence pressed down on the industrial yard. The only sound was the distant howl of the wind, rattling against the rusted shipping containers. Olivia groaned, shifting slightly in her seat. "Ethan, we need to go." "There's nowhere to go," he muttered. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Nothing. The only way out was the same way they came in. But turning back now wasn't an option. A shadow moved near the sedan. Ethan's grip on the gun tightened. Then footsteps. Slow. Measured. The sound of someone approaching. But from where? His pulse spiked. He checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. Another step. Closer this time. A shape emerged from the falling snow. Not from the car. From behind him. Ethan barely had time to react before the back door of his car was ripped open. A hand shot forward, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him backward. The cold barrel of a gun pressed against his temple. A deep voice whispered in his ear, "You should have never come back, Walker." Ethan didn't struggle, didn't breathe, because he knew there was no way out. Not this time. The icy barrel of the gun pressed against Ethan's temple, cold as the night itself. His breath slowed, his mind racing, calculating. Every escape route, every move, it all led to the same conclusion. He was trapped. The voice behind him was calm, too calm. A ghost from the past. "You really thought you could outrun this," the man whispered, his breath warm against Ethan's ear. Ethan swallowed, his pulse hammering. "If you're gonna kill me, just do it." A quiet chuckle. The grip on his collar tightened. "You don't get it, do you?" the man murmured. "This isn't about killing you. Not yet." The words slithered into Ethan's ears like poison. "This is about making you understand." Ethan clenched his jaw. Understand what? A pause. Then the confession. "You were never supposed to make it this far," the voice whispered. "Vince? Olivia? The deal? None of it was real." Ethan's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned in closer. "The rat Vince was hunting," he whispered. "It was never you." Ethan's chest tightened. His entire world shifted in an instant. "You were the distraction, Walker," the man said. "A pawn in a much bigger game." The weight of the truth settled like a noose around Ethan's throat. He had spent the entire night fighting for his life, running, chasing, bleeding. For nothing. Everything had already been decided. And the real betrayal? It was still waiting to reveal itself. Ethan's breath came slow and steady, but inside, his mind was unraveling. The words echoed in his head. He was never the target. He was just a distraction. The grip on his collar tightened, the gun pressing harder against his skull. "You feel it, don't you?" the man whispered. "That moment when everything clicks. When you realize you've been playing the wrong game all along." Ethan's fingers twitched. His instinct screamed at him, "Stall. Find an opening." "Who was it?" Ethan asked, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "Who set me up?" A pause. Then, a smirk in the man's voice. "You already know." A cold wave of realization crashed over Ethan. His mind raced back over every move, every warning, every carefully placed clue. The unknown messages, the silent figures in the dark, the way Olivia always seemed to be one step ahead. Ethan's stomach twisted. No, not her. The man behind him chuckled, reading his silence. There it is. Ethan's entire body tensed. Then the gun clicked. A second of stillness. Then instinct took over. Ethan threw his head back, slamming it into the man's face. The grip loosened. A grunt of pain. Ethan twisted free, spun around, gun raised. Too slow. A fist slammed into his ribs. He staggered back, breath hitching. The man recovered fast, already lifting his weapon. Ethan dropped. Bang! A bullet whizzed past his ear, slamming into the car door behind him. No time. No hesitation. Ethan lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting it violently. A sickening crack. The gun hit the ground. The man hissed in pain, eyes flashing with rage. Ethan didn't give him a chance. He drove his fist into the man's gut, then followed with an elbow to the jaw. The man stumbled just enough. Ethan grabbed his collar and slammed him against the car. Blood trickled from the man's mouth, but still he smiled. You think you're winning? He panted. You think this ends with me? Ethan's grip tightened. The man's smile widened. Then his eyes flicked past Ethan. A shadow moved. Ethan barely had time to react before something hard struck the back of his head. A sharp, white-hot pain exploded through his skull. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. The world tilted. The last thing he saw before everything went black, boots crunching against the snow, and a familiar voice murmuring, "Told you he'd put up a fight." Ethan's mind swam in a haze of pain, his consciousness drifting in and out. Distant voices. The sting of cold air against his skin. The metallic taste of blood on his tongue. Then a sharp jolt. His eyes snapped open. He was on his knees, wrists bound, the rough texture of frozen pavement biting into his skin. The world around him blurred before snapping into focus. A warehouse. Empty. Silent. The air thick with the smell of oil and metal. And in front of him, Vince Delgado. The crime lord stood tall, his black coat dusted with snow, hands casually tucked into his pockets. He wasn't smiling. Behind him, Olivia stood with arms crossed, unreadable. To Ethan's right, the man who had ambushed him leaned against a crate, wiping blood from his split lip. And to his left, Detective Ray Holden. Ethan's stomach coiled. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an execution. Vince exhaled through his nose, stepping forward. You've caused a lot of problems tonight, Walker. Ethan's jaw tightened. Funny. I was thinking the same about you. Vince smirked, but there was no amusement in his eyes. He nodded toward Olivia. Tell him. Ethan turned to her. She hesitated, just for a second. Then the truth. It was always you, Ethan, she said, her voice almost regretful. From the start, Ethan's pulse pounded. What the hell does that mean? Holden stepped in, his smirk sharper than a blade. It means you were never part of the plan. You were the plan. Ethan's breath caught. Vince needed a fall guy. Holden continued. Someone to distract the feds. Someone to make enough noise so the real players could move in. Vince sighed, as if bored. And you did exactly what we needed. Led the wrong people to the right places. Gave us enough time to clean up what needed cleaning up. Ethan's mind raced. And now what? You kill me and pin everything on me. Vince pulled out a gun. Something like that. Ethan's muscles coiled. He had one chance. One moment to act. Vince cocked the gun. Nothing personal. Then chaos. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't Vince's. Screams. Movement. Blood sprayed against the warehouse floor. Ethan lunged. The real fight had just begun. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, cutting through the icy silence like a blade. Vince staggered back, his face contorted in shock. A red stain spread across his coat, dark and unforgiving. His grip on the gun faltered, but he didn't fall. Not yet. Ethan didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, grabbing the weapon from Vince's weakened grasp. With a swift motion, he spun, pointing it toward the nearest threat, Holden. The corrupt detective had already drawn his own gun, but Ethan was faster. Bang! A bullet tore through Holden's shoulder, sending him crashing against a stack of crates. He howled in pain, dropping his weapon as blood seeped through his suit. Ethan turned sharply, searching for Olivia. She was already moving toward him, gun in hand. For a split second, their eyes met, a moment of hesitation. Then, she pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Ethan exhaled sharply. Olivia's face twisted with frustration, her hands trembling around the useless weapon. She had taken the shot. She had made her choice. And now, so would he. His grip tightened around the gun. Do it, Olivia whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. His finger hovered over the trigger. Then, from behind, a groan. Vince, still standing, barely, blood dripping from his lips. You think this ends with me? He rasped. You think killing me changes anything? Ethan turned. Vince grinned, teeth stained red. You're just another pawn, he muttered. And pawns are meant to be sacrificed. Ethan raised the gun. One shot left. A single breath. A single pull of the trigger. Bang! Vince Delgado fell. His body hit the floor with a hollow thud, the crimson pooling beneath him. Silence. The last bullet had been fired, and now it was finally over, or so Ethan thought. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of the smoking gun still heavy in his grip. Vince lay motionless on the cold warehouse floor, his lifeless eyes staring into nothing. It was over, or at least it should have been. A slow, strained chuckle broke the silence. Ethan turned sharply, Holden. The detective sat slumped against the crates, clutching his bleeding shoulder, but somehow still smirking. You really thought that was it? Holden coughed, spitting blood onto the concrete. You really thought killing Vince would fix everything? Ethan narrowed his eyes, keeping the gun trained on him. You tell me. Holden exhaled, his breath shaky but amused. Vince wasn't your real problem, Walker. He was just another piece on the board, the one holding all the cards. His smirk widened. That was never him. A cold realization crept up Ethan's spine. Slowly, his eyes drifted toward Olivia. She stood still, her expression unreadable. Ethan's grip on the gun tightened. Tell me he's lying. Olivia didn't speak, didn't move, didn't deny it. Ethan's stomach twisted. Olivia? Holden chuckled again, wincing in pain. You should have seen it earlier, kid. She played you better than any of us. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. You were never supposed to get this far, Olivia finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. You weren't part of the plan. Ethan's heart pounded. You set me up. She held his gaze. I kept you alive. His grip on the gun wavered. Why? He asked, voice raw. Olivia sighed. Because you were useful. Until now. Ethan's breath caught. The final betrayal. Vince was never the one pulling the strings. It had been Olivia all along. Ethan's hands trembled, the weight of the gun growing heavier with every second. His world had just shattered. Vince was dead. Holden was bleeding out. And Olivia, the one person he thought he could trust, had been lying to him from the start. Say something, he muttered, his voice hollow. Olivia exhaled slowly. Her eyes locked onto his. There was no regret, no fear, just cold acceptance. You were never supposed to survive this, she said. Ethan's chest tightened. And now, Olivia tilted her head slightly. Now, you have two choices. Either walk away or end it. Ethan swallowed hard. He had seen enough death for one night, enough betrayal to last a lifetime. But could he really just walk away? Holden groaned from behind, shifting slightly against the crates. His breathing was ragged, shallow. He wouldn't last much longer. Ethan's mind raced. If he spared Olivia, she would disappear, just like she always did. She would find a way to rebuild, to start over. And one day, she might come for him. If he pulled the trigger now, it would all be over. The gun in his hand felt like a curse. His finger hovered over the trigger. One last shot. One last decision. The cold wind howled through the broken warehouse windows. Time slowed. Ethan exhaled. And then he made his choice. A single breath. A single choice. Ethan's finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of betrayal pressing against his chest. Across from him, Olivia stood still, unflinching, waiting. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't afraid. She had already accepted whatever was coming. Holden let out a weak chuckle from behind. "You see it now, don't you?" he rasped. The truth. Ethan didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Olivia. The truth. The truth was that none of this had ever been about survival. Not really. It was about control. Power. Vince was never the real threat. He was just a name. A face to blame. The real game was being played by those who stayed in the shadows. Those who never got their hands dirty. Holden, Olivia. The ones who had pulled the strings from the very beginning. And Ethan? He had just been a pawn. "You were never supposed to win," Olivia said softly. Ethan's grip on the gun tightened. "I never did," he murmured. A long silence stretched between them. Then he lowered the gun. He saw it now. The bigger picture. The real betrayal. Killing Olivia wouldn't change anything. Killing Holden wouldn't fix what was already broken. The only way to win was to walk away. He turned, stepping past Olivia, past Holden, past the blood-stained floor and the ghosts of the night. Behind him, Olivia finally spoke. "You'll never escape this life, Ethan." Ethan paused at the warehouse door, the cold wind biting at his face. He glanced back once, his expression unreadable. "Watch me." And then he disappeared into the night. The game wasn't over. But this time, he wasn't playing by their rules anymore. Ethan stepped into the freezing night, his breath coming in sharp, visible clouds. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew better. Running without a plan was just another way to die. His body ached, his mind raced. He had minutes, maybe less. Vince was dead. Holden was bleeding out. Olivia had let him walk. For now, but she wouldn't let him disappear. He needed an escape, a clean one. No trails, no mistakes. His phone buzzed. Another unknown message. Tick-tock, Walker. Time's almost up. His stomach twisted. They were still watching him. Headlights appeared in the distance, moving fast. He couldn't tell if it was the police, Vince's remaining men, or someone even worse. It didn't matter. He had to go. A side alley. A fire escape. A way out. He sprinted, his boots slipping on the ice as he scaled the metal stairs. A car screeched onto the street below. Doors slammed. Voices shouted. Find him. Too late. Ethan reached the rooftop, his chest burning with every breath. The city stretched out before him, an endless maze of lights and shadows. He had played their game. He had survived their trap. But now, it was his turn to set the rules. Time was against him, but for the first time all night, he wasn't running to escape. He was running to finish this. Ethan moved fast, his breath sharp against the freezing air. The rooftop stretched out before him, slick with ice, the city lights flickering in the distance. He had no plan, no backup, just instincts and the knowledge that if he stopped now, it was over. Below, voices echoed through the alley. Footsteps. The click of weapons being loaded. They were closing in. No more time. No more chances. He sprinted toward the edge of the building. The drop was steep, but a fire escape dangled just out of reach on the next rooftop. One shot. One move. He didn't hesitate. Pushing off the icy surface, he leapt. For a moment, the world was silent. The wind howled past his ears. The city blurred beneath him. Then impact. His fingers barely caught the rusted metal railing. His body swung violently, nearly slipping. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he held on, muscles screaming. Below, the shouts grew louder. They had seen him. Bullets tore through the night, ricocheting off metal, missing by inches. Ethan gritted his teeth, pulling himself up, his breath ragged. He scrambled over the ledge, rolling onto the rooftop. No time to stop. A new street. A new escape. A motorcycle sat parked near a stairwell. Engine running. Waiting. Ethan's pulse spiked. It wasn't luck. Someone had left it for him. He didn't have time to question it. With one last glance at the men swarming the building behind him, he ran for the bike, swung his leg over the seat, and gunned the throttle. The engine roared. Tires skidded against the ice as he peeled away, speeding into the night. The city blurred past him. The wind cut through his clothes. He didn't know who had left the bike. He didn't know what came next. But he was alive. And for now, that was enough. The city stretched out before him, endless and unforgiving. The cold air burned his lungs as Ethan sped through the empty streets, the roar of the motorcycle blending into the howling wind. But no matter how fast he went, he knew one thing for certain. The past never stays buried. The snow-covered roads, the frozen river, the blood-stained warehouse floor, they all held secrets. His secrets. Their secrets. And snow? Snow never truly covers anything. It only hides the truth for a while. Ethan's hands tightened around the handlebars. He had survived the night. He had escaped their trap. But this wasn't over. The city would remember. The blood on the ice would thaw. The truth, no matter how deep it was buried, would rise again. And when it did, he would be ready. Ethan didn't slow down. The cold night air whipped against his face, but his mind was sharper than ever. He had escaped, but escape wasn't enough. Not yet. He knew how this worked. No one just walked away from Vince's empire, from Holden's network, from Olivia's web of lies. They would come for him, unless he made the first move. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. Ethan smirked. They still thought they were in control, but they had underestimated him once, and that had been their mistake. With one hand, he pulled a second phone from his jacket, a burner, one they didn't know about. A single number, a single message. It's done. Now let's finish this. He pressed send. The trap had already been set. They thought he was running, but in reality, he was leading them straight into their own downfall. The city lights flickered in the distance as Ethan rode through the frozen streets, his grip firm on the handlebars. The night had been long, the betrayals deep, but he was still here, alive. They had tried to play him, to use him, to erase him, and yet he had outlived them all. But survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. This wasn't just an escape. It was a reset. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that deal hours ago. That man had died somewhere between the blood-stained snow and the final gunshot. Now, he had something they never expected, an upper hand. As he sped down the empty highway, the weight of the past lifted, replaced by something new. A purpose, a choice. He could disappear, leave it all behind, start over. Or he could finish what they started. One last game, one last move. This wasn't just the end. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Ethan had a choice. He could vanish, let the city forget his name, and bury the past beneath the falling snow. Or he could step back into the game, not as a pawn, but as the one pulling the strings. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Trust is an illusion, and survival is earned, not given. Vince thought he was untouchable. Holden believed he controlled everything. Olivia played the longest con. But in the end, they all fell. Because betrayal has a way of coming full circle. And the ones who think they're in control, they never see it coming. As Ethan disappeared into the horizon, the city remained the same, cold, ruthless, and waiting for its next story. Because in a world like this, no secret stays buried forever. What does this story teach us? Betrayal doesn't just happen in crime. It happens in life, in business, in trust. The real question is, how do you react? Do you fall, or do you rise above? Ethan's story reminds us, not everyone is who they seem. Not every deal is what it promises to be. And sometimes survival is about knowing when to walk away and when to fight back. What do you think? Did Ethan make the right choice? Would you have done the same in his place? Let us know in the comments. What would you do if you found yourself caught in a web of lies and deception? And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next gripping crime tale. Because here at Crime Chronicles Confidential, the truth is never what it seems.